small hand hoe. I got that in a village.
So why did you take it?
I don't know. I don't know. I took one machete also. It was beside somebody, and it was full of blood. I don't know why I brought them back. When I came back, I did a lot of speaking engagements. That was the old theory, eh? You know, talk about it, and with time, things will get better. So I did a lot of talking. And in a couple places where I knew I had some pretty stiff crowds, military staff college, certain conventions, certain people, gatherings, I used to bring a watermelon, not a big one, about that size. And I'd just put it on the table. And then I'd have this hoe and a machete in a bag. And so I'd get into my discussion, and at one point, to make my point, I would take the hoe out of the bag, right there on the podium, and put that hoe right into the watermelon. Well, that would catch people. But it's when I took out the machete and chopped that head apart. That made the point. That's what I failed. I made the point after, not during.
Rwanda is a poor country. It cannot afford to build memorials to the genocide. Instead, in certain places, the bodies of the victims are left to lie where they fell. The village of Gikongoro is one of these places. One of the only survivors of the killing here was Elias Rawarinda. Elias is a Tutsi, the minority group who were the main target of the genocide.
Hari amatungo noneho abantu bagahinga bakabona ifumbire bagafumbira imirima n'imyaka ikera nkuko twahingaga dufite nk'amatungo y'inka nabonaga ari byo cyiza twari dufite biza bataragize amahirwe yo kwiga ubwo rero nyuma ho birangiriye umvungu niyo haje kuba habi cyane uyu umuntu abyibutse n'agahinda kenshi umuntu abona habize.
Anne-Marie Contengwa is also a Tutsi. In 1994, she and her brother Lando came to know General Romeo Dallaire.
Uramutse umubonye wamubwira ko nifuza kumubona kugira ngo musabe icyo kintu. Ngerera ikintu musaba ni iki nuko yavugisha ukuri akavuga ibi bintu uko byagenze akavuga ukuntu yananiwe kudutabara ni nacyo kintu gikomeye nifuza ahubwo ndifuza kumubona.
August 1993. Dallaire flies to Kigali, the capital of Rwanda.
Everybody called it the paradise that had found some rough times because of conflict within the two ethnicities, but it was still a paradise on earth.
Dallaire is a respected brigade commander with plenty of peacetime experience. But at 47, he has never commanded a field operation. He's eager for the Rwandan mission.
It would be an extraordinary place to go and learn Africa. I know many of my colleagues wished it was them to be called. Incredible excitement. Because I was landing as the commander. It's sort of like a fireman who's spent all his life in prevention, has never gone to a fire and never grasped all the nuances and the experiences and the effects of command in the field or an actual fire and the smoke and all the risks and so on. The mission started there that afternoon.
Delaire's mission is to monitor the peace between Rwanda's two opposing sides. The government is dominated by the majority ethnic group, the Hutus. The rebel Rwandan Patriotic Front, or RPF, include Hutus, but is mostly Tutsi. After 3 years of fighting, the government and RPF have signed a peace accord. Delaire estimates he needs 5,000 troops to keep this peace. But in New York, the UN Security Council resists.
I had not assessed how gun-shy in New York and the contributing nations were because of the Somalia.
A few days before the Rwanda mission begins, a United States-led UN mission to Somalia has ended in disaster and TV images of dead American soldiers.
So the reverberations of all that, I mean, lots of countries are still smarting under what happened to the Americans.
The Americans want to limit the Rwanda mission to 500 men. But Kofi Annan, the new head of peacekeeping, persuades the Security Council to give 2,500. Annan wants those soldiers to come from Canada, the most experienced country. But Ottawa says no. With only half the troops he needs to be patched together from a dozen countries, Delaire is expected to deliver a cheap and easy mission and no body bags.
I asked for at least one good staff officer, one officer who could be my right-hand man.
Ottawa does send one more Canadian officer, Major Brent Beardsley.
We set up our headquarters within days, and he was my shadow throughout the mission.
Friends of mine who had worked for him said, "You're going to work like you've never worked in your life," and I was not disappointed. He was very big on that. You've got to get out and see the ground to get a feel for what's going on. You can't sit in your headquarters and have people reporting to you.
Delaire begins to make contact with people on both sides who want peace. One of the leaders he comes to know well is Lando Ndasingwa and his Canadian wife Helen. Lando met Helen at McGill University in Quebec. They married and then returned to Rwanda with their 2 children. Lando went into politics and Helen ran the family hotel.
She would welcome you at the door. She'd make you feel important. She'd bring you in. She'd sit you down at a table. She would pass by during the meal to see if things were fine. She would talk with you.
For journalists, politicians, and the Canadian officers, Chez Lando is the most important meeting place in Kigali.
We used it as an opportunity to gather information. If you were prepared to listen and to talk and to question people, you could pick up a lot of information.
Unlike most Rwandans, Lando talks openly about Tutsis and Hutus, about ethnicity. He is proud of the diversity of his own family. Not only is he married to a Canadian, but his sister Anne-Marie is married to a Hutu.
Iyo tukiri abana ntabwo twabyumvaga neza ibyo ari byo. Turi mu mashuri hari ubwo bakoraga abarimu bakundaga kubibaza rimwe na rimwe ngira ngo bakoraga bandukuraga abana bafite mu mashuri bakamenya n'ubwoko bwabo. Ndataha mbaza iwacu ntariko abantu b'abatutsi niko numva ari abantu bakoraga ibintu bibi nti abo ni bande. Barabanza barora hirya kuko ntabwo bashakaga hari ko menya ibyo bibazo byose.
In old Rwanda, the Tutsis were herders and the Hutu were farmers. The Tutsis were often richer than the more numerous Hutus. But everyone spoke the same language and intermarriage was common.
Ku bantu babyo mu baturage byari bihari ariko nk'abanyarwanda bo hasi rwanya bagufi b'abahinzi ntabwo babyitabiraga cyane kubera ko basangira nko mu bukwe nko guhingisha mu minsi mikuru.
Rwandans would say that by day God travels the earth, but at night he sleeps in Rwanda. After the First World War, the great powers gave Rwanda to Belgium. The new colonists needed overseers for their tea and banana plantations. Since the Tutsis were taller, the Belgians thought them superior and made them the bosses. The Tutsis got wealthier while the Hutu were forced into work gangs. The Belgians would say to the Tutsis, "You whip the Hutu or we will whip you." By 1959, colonial empires were crumbling all over Africa. Belgium gave Rwandans their independence, but it now switched loyalties and installed a Hutu dictatorship. The Hutus took revenge on their hated Tutsi masters. Thousands of Tutsis fled. Anne-Marie and Lando's parents took the children to Uganda.
ntabwo bicaga cyane uretse ko abantu barabatwikiraga icyo gihe abantu bari bataraba hari abagome cyane bagiye baba abagome buhoro buhoro.
In 1973, an army colonel, Juvenal Habyarimana, took power in a coup. He was a Hutu, but he said he would stop the massacres and unite Rwanda.
Habyarimana aza ku butegetsi iwacu bari barahungiye Burundi bahise bagaruka ariko icyo gihe yavugaga ibintu byiza ku buryo nta bibazo wabonaga mbese.
But President Habyarimana feared that the returning Tutsis threatened his regime. He closed the border and prevented any more from coming home. In Kigali, Lando and other Tutsi leaders were arrested and tortured. In 1990, Tutsis and a few moderate Hutus formed the rebel RPF. They invaded, and by 1993, the RPF had forced Habyarimana to sign the peace accord. Under the accord, Habyarimana is still the president, but in a new unity government. Lando is the one Tutsi minister.
There was a desire to make this work, and that I was to be an instrument to marry into the process of making this work for the stability of that country so they can get on with things.
November 1st, 1993. Dallaire raises the UN flag above his headquarters in Kigali. But only 400 UN soldiers have arrived. As always, the UN is dependent on its donor nations, and as usual, they are slow to send their troops. Lando is worried, and so is the new Prime Minister, Agatu Willingiyimana, who is a moderate Hutu. They tell Dallaire that Hutu extremists are forming militia and stockpiling weapons, and she and Lando have both been threatened.
We basically met the moderates, who were all very pro-Arusha, pro-peace agreement. What we didn't appreciate was the extent of the extremists who had no intention of implementing that peace agreement, and that was not made known to us during the technical mission. We were, in fact, I think, shamed. They needed time. They needed time to prepare for what they were going to do. They knew they could not win at that point against the RPF. The RPF would have defeated them in battle. So they needed time, and a peacekeeping operation could buy them time.
Lando and Prime Minister Agat suspect that the president's inner circle is involved. Dallaire cannot legally take sides or confront President Habyarimana. His mission is under the part of the UN Charter called Chapter 6, peacekeeping, not peacemaking. November 10th, 1993. Dallaire's troops finally begin to arrive from 24 different countries. The best are a battle-hardened unit from Ghana and 450 commandos from Belgium. But some of the 9 countries have diverted the UN money intended for their peacekeepers. Many troops arrive without even basic supplies.
So the soldiers arrived in Rwanda, literally got off the plane without a bottle of water for supper or a meal. And we had no logistics in place, and we literally were on the market buying bags of rice to feed them a supper.
Dallaire puts his patchwork army to use. He creates a demilitarized zone in the north. He declares Kigali a weapons-free sector, and in accordance with the peace accord, brings 1 RPF battalion inside the city limits. November 17th, Dallaire formally opens the headquarters of UNAMIR, the United Nations mission in Rwanda.
That day, I had the president sit beside me at the opening in the headquarters, opening the headquarters, And that night, 35 people were massacred in and just south of the DMZ in 5 different places during the same time. Why those massacres at that time? It just couldn't be coincidence.
Dallaire dispatches Beardsley north to a site where children have been killed.
This is my first mission. I'm on the ground. It's a special type of task. He wants his eyes on the ground, so he sends me up to find it. We walk up the side of the mountain. We come across the children. They're in ages from a boy of approximately 6 to a girl of approximately 14. All of the girls have been seriously raped. Their dresses are pulled up. Their vaginas are split open from mass rape. All of the children have been strangled. There's a burn mark around each of their necks. I have a translator with me, supposedly our official translator for UNAMIR. I turn to him and I say to him, ask these people who they think did this thing. And he goes into a much longer tirade than my short phrase could have been, and I hear the word Ekotanye about 3 times during his phrase, which is the word for RPF. And then all of a sudden, all the people start responding RPF, FPR. So I'm very suspicious of him, and I remain suspicious of him throughout the entire mission. It is getting late in the day. We get in the vehicle, we drive back. I report to General Dallaire, and it just didn't make sense to me that the RPF had done this thing. Very conveniently, there was an RPF glove left laying on the ground. The RPF, I never saw them wear gloves, and if they did wear a glove, why would they leave it laying on the ground? In addition, the government commandos who were waiting for us at the bottom of the hill all wear a red sash cord, a red rope around their waist tied, and they all carry a very large knife with a big hilt on it. And it appeared to me more when I looked at the children's necks that it was a cord that had been used to strangle them. And these commandos went through extensive training with these cords on how to silently kill people. So I was more concluding that it had been government commandos trying to stage a massacre to blame it on the RPF.
Dallaire has no solid evidence that the massacres are linked to President Habyarimana's government until he is approached by a senior leader of the Hutu militia who offers him information.
The informant approached us in Kigali, which was Luc Marchal's area of responsibility.
Colonel Luc Marchal is head of the Belgian contingent and is the Kigali sector commander. Dallaire sends him to meet the informant, called Jean-Pierre.
Moi, je l'ai rencontré la première fois le 10 janvier, dans des circonstances tout à fait dignes d'un film. Vu les problèmes d'alimentation électrique à Kigali, régulièrement, les quartiers étaient plongés dans l'obscurité. Et donc, j'ai rencontré l'informateur à la lueur d'une bougie. Il m'a raconté que le FPR était leur ennemi et que combattre un ennemi, c'est tout à fait normal pour un citoyen, mais que depuis qu'on lui avait demandé de répertorier, donc ça veut dire de localiser les habitations où vivaient les Tutsis pour pouvoir les éliminer, que ça, il ne pouvait pas, sa conscience ne lui permettait pas d'accepter ce genre de situation. Et à partir de ce moment-là, on a bien réalisé qu'il fallait préparer le worst case.
The informant describes a well-conceived plan for the extermination of Rwanda's Tutsi minority. The young militias he has been training, called Interhamwe, can kill 1,000 Tutsis every 20 minutes. The plan includes murdering a few Belgian soldiers first to scare the UN out of the country. If Dallaire will protect him and his family, he will show the UN proof of arms caches in Kigali. Dallaire orders a secret operation to find out if Jean-Pierre is telling the truth.
Remember, all this is done with absolutely no authority. I'm not allowed to do this at all. I mean, Chapter 6, you have no intelligence gathering capability. So the whole thing about Chapter 6 is you're totally transparent with all parties.
So why are you doing it?
Because by then, I didn't have that full sense of transparency. And the force commander, without intelligence, I'm deaf and blind. So this was a fabulous opportunity to do it.
Jean-Pierre, accompagné d'un officier de la minuar, a circulé dans la ville de Kigali et a indiqué une dizaine de caches d'armes. Pour chacune de ces caches d'armes, il a donné toutes sortes de détails qui nous permettaient de mener une action préparée sur ces objectifs.
One of the arms caches is in the basement of the headquarters of the MRND, President Habyarimana's party. Marshal sends in a black UN soldier in civilian dress to check it out. There are machine guns, ammunition, explosives, and thousands of machetes.
J'ai proposé au général Dallaire de mener une action militaire sur la cache d'armes qui se trouvait au siège du parti, MRND.
The entire extremist side would have been knocked right off their feet. They hardly could complain about us recovering illegal weapons because they would not admit that they were theirs. So it's wonderful. When you steal from a thief, he doesn't call a cop. It was that type of situation.
Cette présence de cache d'armes constituait pour nous une quasi-obligation d'agir.
I may not stop them, but at least I would create enough havoc with this operation that they would be off balance. And then I would regain the initiative.
January 11th, 1994, Dallaire sends an official fax to Kofi Annan's office in New York. It contains Jean-Pierre's information, including the plan to kill Belgians to create a Somalia situation in Rwanda. He informs Annan that he intends to raid the arms cache in 36 hours. He signs off, "Puisque veut, allons-y. Where there's a will, there's a way. Let's go."
If you look at the facts, I am not asking for authority. Nowhere in that do I say, I need your authority to do this. I am simply telling him that in 36 hours, I am doing this. And so when I got the answer within hours, that no way, Jose, you're not doing this, I was very shocked.
The fax is signed by Iqbal Riza, Kofi Annan's deputy. In it, the UN forbids Dallaire from raiding the arms caches, and no protection may be offered to Jean-Pierre, the informant.
They just don't understand. I'm not using the right words. Help me with the words, Brent. I'm working in English. You know, like, am I using the wrong word in English? And I'm reading the words. And I'm going, sir, you know, an idiot could read this and understand what you're saying. There's no simpler way to say that. I think he regrets using the word offensive. If there's one word that we could take out of that 11 Jan cable, it would just be the word. We would intend to do exactly the same thing. We would just take out the word offensive and put in the word deterrent. And that might keep them happy. That word offensive scares them. It scares the group in New York because they're thinking about Somalia, and they're terrified of that word. And I think he feels guilty to an extent because he goes, you know, I may have blown it with them just through the use of one word.
Incredible response. Very difficult to have Luc Marchal understand, because he was mandated for the security of the weapons secure area. I mean, that was his job to me, delegated from me to him. And there I was telling him that from higher headquarters, we had no authority to conduct an operation like that.
Marshal reluctantly tells Jean-Pierre that the UN can offer him no protection. He leaves. No one ever sees him again. There's worse. Under a Chapter 6 mission, violations must be reported to all parties. Dallaire is ordered to warn President Habyarimana that he has found the weapons hidden in the president's own party headquarters.
I think we caught him totally off guard.
At first, Dallaire thinks the president is surprised that the UN is onto him, but then he wonders if Habyarimana actually may not have known about the weapons.
I wasn't convinced that Habyarimana was calling the shots. More data was coming out of the power of President Habyarimana's wife and her brothers in the inner sanctum power structure.
The president's wife and her brothers form a powerful Hutu clan, some of them involved in poaching mountain gorillas. One is suspected of murdering researcher Diane Fossey. A key leader of the clan is a retired army officer, Colonel Theonest Bagasora.
Bagasora operated as a mover and dealer and a man who got things going.
Information is now coming in that Bagasora is linked to the death squads and is training the Interahamwe militia.
Bagasora, he had the ear of the president's wife and particularly the president's brothers-in-law.
After Dallaire's meeting with the president, this clan knows that Dallaire is onto them. They speed up their preparations. The weapons Dallaire had hoped to seize are distributed to the Interahamwe militia.
This third force wasn't just a small group, it was an extensive network that went right throughout the entire Rwandese government side, right down to the parish level.
Colonel Bagasora uses the radio to coordinate an anti-Tutsi propaganda campaign. It calls for a final solution. The broadcasts repeat endlessly that Rwanda must be cleansed of inyenzi, cockroaches. They say this time pregnant women must not be spared. Last time they were too merciful, and those Tutsi babies have now grown up to persecute the Hutu. February 17th, 1994. Dallaire gets intelligence that a hit squad plans to kill Lando and his family. The assassin is to be Lando's neighbor. The head of the unit is one of Colonel Bagasora's henchmen.
Raporo yoherejwe no muri Nations Unies z'ukwa kabiri, Lando yagombaga kwicwa ndetse hari n'undi muntu kuko ibyo bintu by'abantu bagomba gupfa bimenye mbere. Nge numva yaragomba kubwira abantu bakava mu nzira bakagenda niba atarashoboye kubarinda neza.
Ces gens ont cru dans l'efficacité de cette protection. Et je dois dire que, bon, personnellement, j'étais aussi foncièrement persuadé que nous serions en mesure d'exécuter cette responsabilité.
Dallaire sends small units to guard Lando's house and the house of Madame Agathe, the Prime Minister.
We're getting it from all sides, from the moderates, from the RPF, NGOs, church leaders, and just the situation that we're seeing on the ground on a daily basis.
March 10th, Dallaire discovers a manifest of guns delivered to the Rwandan army. But guns are only part of the problem. In the last 2 years, over 500,000 machetes have entered the country. They are now in the hands of the Interahamwe militias.
Tutsi and Hutu children are being separated in the school. Tutsi children sit on one side of the class, Hutu children sit on the other. In actual fact, they were getting them ready for genocide because children didn't have identity cards. But if you could identify them where they sat in a schoolroom or a classroom, or a teacher could identify who were the Tutsis and who were the Hutus, then those kids could be. So there's so much that's being prepared and it's coming in. It's getting very ethnic, it's getting very violent. There's a political stalemate, the security situation is deteriorating rapidly, and all of that information is pumped back on a daily and weekly basis back to New York.
Dallaire sends 5 more faxes back to New York, each one more desperate than the last.
We keep pushing for it, right through February, through March. They must have got sick of hearing about it because we're continually asking for permission to do what we now relabel deterrent operations, which is exactly the same thing. It's just, it's a term that they would most likely like, but the permission never comes.
Delaire's superiors worry that he's overreacting, that he's a hothead looking for an excuse to get into action.
If you're giving command of a mission and you have lives of people that could be at stake, or simply conducting the mission, if your senior headquarters have given you that mission but have a doubt, ergo they're going to keep an eye on this guy. They're not too sure, how it'll go, and so they're concerned about it. Then that changes the whole assessment in that higher headquarters of what I'm doing and what I'm reporting.
Willy Kleist, the Belgian foreign minister, arrives in New York. He has been to Rwanda, and he confirms Delaire's reports. Kleist requests that more men in arms be sent to Delaire. The Security Council meets. Some countries are willing, but the United States and Britain refuse.
It is very, very tense. And I did not have the military initiative at that point.
April 2nd, a moment of hope. President Habyarimana leaves for Tanzania on his personal jet for talks on the crisis. Under pressure from the other African states, he agrees to put the peace process back on track. He phones a minister back home and orders him to prepare a statement announcing his intention to honor the remaining clauses of the peace accord. 4 days later, he starts his journey home. On the night of April 6, 1994, his Falcon 50 makes its final approach to land at Kigali Airport.
Muri uwo mugoroba nyine hasaga nabi koko. Ngiye numvaga ntameze neza kuko hari ikindi kintu ngira nuko nkunda kugira za premonition cyangwa ibintu byo kurota. Nkareba hejuru bikamera nkaho hari ibicu byinshi, bikamera nkaho imvura iri hejuru, ukabona hari brime nyinshi, ukabona ku ijuru hameze nabi. Hanyuma nari nicaye muri salo, noneho twumva indege zihinda, ariko bigeze aho numva ikintu gisa n'igituritse.
200 feet off the runway, President Habyarimana's plane is struck by a missile. No one knows who launches it, but it destroys the plane and everyone on board. The last check on the power of the Hutu extremists has been eliminated.
Nge numvaga noneho ububabare bwacu bugiye gutangira.
General Dallaire ordered a red alert, which was to recall all troops to their camps and go to a heightened state of security. And we received a phone call that there was a meeting of a crisis committee at the Army headquarters, and could General Dallaire come as soon as possible.
At Army headquarters, Dallaire finds that Colonel Bagasora is now in charge.
Camp had turned into an armed camp. I mean, they're armed to the teeth. Bagasora sat behind his normal desk and continued to field telephones, calls, not many, signing documents, sitting back there, sort of musing on the situation, and I'm discussing with him things like, where's the political structure? What are you going to be doing? What are we doing here?
Bagasora claims that it is not a coup, but when Dallaire insists that the rightful leader is now the Prime Minister, Madame Agat, Bagasora says she is too weak and rejects the idea. Dallaire leaves the meeting to consult with the UN. Bagasora insists on coming with him.
Don't remember us talking that much, in fact. He was in his thoughts, and I was in my thoughts.
There are roadblocks erected at major intersections with Tutsis being held at gunpoint. Bagasora noisily reprimands the troops and frees the Tutsis. Dallaire suspects that it is just for show. He believes that Bagasora is giving the Presidential Guard orders to kill. Dallaire heads back to UN headquarters.
By then, we were being swamped by calls by UN staffs, by moderates for more security.
A call comes through from the Prime Minister, Madame Agat. She wants to address the nation by radio to bring calm. Dallaire sends troops to escort her to the station.
I said, get her to that radio station so she can start talking. And 5 o'clock was the time that we felt was appropriate because people were waking up then, the sun comes up not long after that, and that's sort of the morning activity. She'd hit the general population with that. I'm calling up the radio stations myself, telling them that we want Madame Agathe and we'll escort her and we'll protect the radio stations. The government one, the chap there, the producer, at first said, yes, come, but come fast because the Presidential Guard are starting to roam around. A few minutes later, he calls back to say it's too late. The Presidential Guard are already inside the building, and he said there's no way that I can let Madame Agathe come here.
Koloneli Bakosora yatambukije itangazo kuri televiziyo, kuri radiyo, avuga ko habagiyeho etat d'urgence, ko nta muntu wemerewe kongera gusohoka mu rugo rwe. Ngira ngo ibyo bagira ngo noneho abantu bahame mu ngo hatagira uhunga.
5:30 a.m., April 7th. Presidential guards surround Anne-Marie's house. She wakes the children and gives them their passports.
Icyo gihe nibwo abo basirikare ba Nations nabo baje noneho baravuga bati nimusohoke vuba muze tugende, bati batwohereje kubakura hano.
The Rwandan soldiers block Anne-Marie from leaving her house, but in the confusion she manages to smuggle her kids into the back of a UN van. 6 a.m., April 7th. At the house of the Prime Minister, Madame Agathe, the Belgians sent to escort her are in a standoff with the Presidential Guard. The UN is outnumbered. They can't evacuate the Prime Minister. They can't even get out themselves. Dallaire jumps in his jeep. He will try and get to the Prime Minister, Madame Agathe himself. 3 blocks from her house, he is stopped at a heavily armed roadblock manned by the Presidential Guard.
This guy just came up to me and said, "You're not going anywhere." And so we discussed, explained who I was. You're not going anywhere. I simply go up to the guy and say, "I'm going through." And so we walk through and the turrets turn and all that bullshit. But, they don't fire it.
But he is too late. The Belgians have surrendered to the Presidential Guard and have been taken to Bagasora's camp. Madame Agathe and her husband and children escape over their back wall into the UN compound next door. She hides her children. The soldiers catch up with her. Madame Agathe calmly asks them to take her somewhere else. She doesn't want her kids to hear her die. But they shoot her and her husband on the spot. They leave the Prime Minister's body with her dress thrown over her head and a bottle pushed into her vagina. Dallaire is still on foot nearby. He is picked up by a Rwandan soldier in a jeep. He tells the soldier to take him to Bagasora.
As we're going towards the Calsperia, I look to the right as we're passing the secondary gate of the camp, and I see 2 individuals in Belgian camouflage uniform laying in the compound, and so I just catch it as we're driving by.
The bodies of the Belgian soldiers who were taken from Madame Agathe's house.
I tell the driver, "Hey, those are my guys, stop." He says, no, the situation is too chaotic in the camp. I'll bring you to where the meeting is, where all the commanders are.
Dallaire must decide whether to send in men to rescue any Belgians who may be still alive in the camp. It is a decision taken in a few seconds.
I had realized that I am now taking casualties. I've got troops all over the country, a bunch of them unarmed. I got civilians all over the country. I have no defensive stores. I'm low on ammunition. All those things, I've been repeating them daily in sit reps. So, they were instinctive. And I've got them deployed all over the place in a Chapter 6 peacekeeping scenario. And so my assessment is, at that time, that I cannot conduct offensive operations.
At the meeting, Dallaire tries to get access to the camp where the Belgians are. Bagosora puts him off and suggests to Dallaire that the attack shows that it might be best for the Belgian troops to leave Rwanda.
How do you know you're in the middle of a coup d'etat? You know, is something particular there? I mean, the president's dead. They've taken over the radio station. They've got barricades all over the place now, the military forces. And I've got all the leaders together, military, with no political desire or entity coming to the fore. It's pretty hard to say that I'm not in a coup d'etat.
All over Kigali, key leading Tutsis and moderate Hutus are being murdered by the army and police, effectively eliminating any remaining opposition to the genocide that is coming next.
Tuvuganye nkajya numva ibintu by'ibisasu biturika. Noneho ndibuka ko yavuze ati ibyo bisasu mwumva ati ni bisasu ati garde présidentielle yageze hano ati batangiye gutera ibintu ku rugo.
Lando hangs up and calls Colonel Marshall.
Bon, c'est le ministre lui-même qui est à l'appareil et qui me dit « Colonel, envoyez-moi d'urgence quelqu'un parce que sinon on va être assassiné. » Et il avait à peine prononcé le mot d'assassiné que j'ai entendu des explosions de grenades, des tirs d'armes automatiques. Et bon, il a dit c'est trop tard.
Lando is made to watch as his Canadian wife and then his children are shot one by one. Then he is shot. "3 p.m. April 7th. The RPF has had enough."
The RPF call and say, no, we're swamped with people screaming for our help. They're slaughtering them all over the place. We must now take action. We are now moving out.
The RPF brush their UN guards aside and break out of their compound. The rebel battalion fight their way through Kigali. They take a position on a hill overlooking the city and start to battle the Hutu soldiers and militias. 8 p.m., Dallaire goes to see the bodies of his Belgian soldiers in the local morgue. He is told that at the time he drove past and saw their bodies at the camp, there were still 3 Belgian soldiers alive.
General Dallaire does not come back to us till well after dark that night. He assembles the staff and he informs us that the Belgians have been killed, that he has seen their bodies at the Kigali hospital and that they were deliberately murdered. He inspires us with some words that there's been a total breakdown between the parties, there's a resumption of hostilities. While our mandate may technically be over, we still have a responsibility to try and gain control of the situation or bring the parties back together, so we will continue.
Dallaire phones New York and outlines his belief that Rwanda is now on the threshold of a planned genocide. But the UN now takes the position that this is a civil war, and since there is no peace to keep anymore, they can't get involved.
I'm advised that my mission is there. That's a peace mission. That my pursuit of trying to prevent this thing from escalating, of course, is my primary function. And that the use of force will be only in self-defense. That's made very clear to me.
Anne-Marie and her husband hide in the ceiling of a neighbor's house. Her children have been taken to a local French language school where 2,000 people are being protected by Belgian UN troops. April 11th, 1994. The Belgian government, shaken by the death of its 10 soldiers, orders its troops to abandon the college. The only civilians they rescue are Belgian nationals. The Rwandans who have taken refuge there beg the United Nations troops to save them too. When the Belgians refuse, they ask to be shot rather than face the Hutu machetes. As the Belgians leave the compound, the Interhamwe enter. Anne-Marie's son dies in the slaughter. Her daughter hides under a pile of bodies and survives.
And I would like to ask them how they had been being able to abandon children. Children, they put out their house.
The Belgian government now orders Marshall to pull his troops out of Rwanda altogether.
Donc quand on vit une situation pareille, sur le plan humain, on ne peut pas quitter. Il faut rester pour aider le peu qu'on peut aider pour le faire. Et nous, qu'est-ce qu'on nous demande de faire? C'est de partir et de laisser tout exploser.
If the Belgians leave right away, the airport will fall to the Hutu army and militias. Dallaire will lose control of all incoming aid and supplies.
He delayed the final deployment of the final troops from the airport by 3 days because I couldn't get the Ghanaians down through all the roadblocks with the transport fast enough to take over. And so he was contrary to direct orders from the highest of levels.
Marshall's delay keeps the airport in UN hands, but Dallaire has to watch as Brussels pulls out his best troops.
And it's rather ironic, because as that Herc was taking off 50 years earlier, my father and father-in-law were fighting through Belgium to liberate it. And a lot of Canadians died in Belgium. A lot of them. 50 years later, I was picking up the mess from the Belgians who were deserting me in the face of the enemy.
The Belgian pullout sends a message to the Hutu extremists that no one will interfere with their plans. Bagasora now uses the radio broadcast to activate the Interhamwe all over Rwanda.
Yamenaga interahamwe hano. Ubwo hari saa 9 z'ijoro, interahamwe ziragutaha. Ubwo bamenamo amasasu, ugeze ngo arasimbuka bagatema n'imipanga. Ubwo mbese kuryo byari bimeze nabi cyane. Ubwo mbese nibwo habaye ku manywa nk'igihe cyo mu masaha 3. Nibwo bandashe mu mutwe hano. Bavana imyenda. Bise n'inkweto n'ambaye bajyana. Ari bazikufa.
Elias walks for 6 days to the border. All over Rwanda, neighbors are killing neighbors, teachers are killing pupils, and priests are killing their parishioners. Hutus must kill or face the threat of death themselves. Tutsis who want to go quickly pay their killers to shoot them instead of hacking them to death. The going rate is $32. All the while, the radio prods everyone to keep working. Thousands flee to the Amahoro Stadium opposite Dallaire's headquarters.
We're putting people into the Amahoro Stadium where we have no water, no food, no medical supplies for them. Within days, we have dysentery, we have cholera. It becomes almost a death trap of disease. But we have to put people there because it's the only safe place we have. We have nowhere else safe to put them. It's a time that leaves a very, very bad taste in my mouth.
In the last week of April, Beardsley falls ill and is flown to a hospital in Nairobi.
I never said goodbye to General Dallaire, and I never said goodbye to any of my friends because I expected to be back in a day or two, and unfortunately, Rwanda was over for me.
Dallaire develops a plan to stop the killings. He needs a rapid reaction unit to close the radio station, to confiscate weapons and arrest perpetrators, and he needs permission to use force.
I did not come to Rwanda to shoot Rwandans. But if I came to Rwanda to assist Rwandans, then there's got to be a method in there that we can do it and simply not be bystanders.
There is no shortage of volunteer troops. African nations in the region want to solve the problem. All that is needed is a mandate from the Security Council. He contacts New York. April 21st, 10 p.m. Dallaire receives a fax. Security Council Resolution 912. Dallaire and his troops are ordered out of Rwanda. The mission is over. He meets with his Ghanaian commander, General Henry Anyadoho.
General Anido and I sit in his office, and I say, that means we failed. We're going to desert the people that we even have under our control. I said, we can't do that. And Henry said, we will not go down in history as having failed morally the Rwandan people. We may not save many, but we will never go down in history as being morally corrupt. And I said, Henry, that's all I need. I flew back to New York and said, we're not moving.
Dallaire refuses to leave. The fax machine is silent. He is on his own.
One evening, I'm in my headquarters, and the lights are out because we were being under bombardment and being shot at. I got my curtain over and no light. I got a screen. And I'm standing there. The decision had been taken, we're staying. I had no fuel. I mean, we were sucking fuel from other vehicles to get a couple of them going. My radio system was precarious, been hit. And I was standing there, and it sounded like thousands of voices of despair. Not individually identified, it's sort of like a cacophony of moaning, crying, some screaming, all together. And that sound was coming to me through, of course, the screen. And to this day, I'm never sure whether or not it was the screaming of the slaughtering going on just down the hill, or was simply a breeze through the screen.
By May 1st, 1994, the genocide is 21 days old. At least 200,000 people are dead. Dallaire has managed to hang on to about 450 troops. He is short on supplies and ammunition. But at last, he is free to act. He creates safe zones all over Kigali. About 40,000 Tutsis find refuge in his enclaves. He convinces Ottawa to give him 2 Hercules aircraft. They are often his only line of supply. The RPF have begun their assault on Kigali. Wherever they go, the genocide stops. Dallaire moves as many refugees as he can to safety behind their lines. The Interahamwe begin to call Dallaire the Tutsi, and Colonel Bagasora threatens his life. Dallaire promises any journalist who stays a story a day. If the world won't come to Rwanda, Dallaire will bring Rwanda to the world. Michael Enright, a Canadian radio journalist, phones every week. Dallaire comes to rely on his calls.
General, good evening.
How are you?
I am fine. More importantly, how are you?
Not too bad, not too bad.
His voice was home.
We've heard reports that Kigali is almost deserted.
There have been firefights throughout the day. In fact, there's one just going on just down the street here.
I said to Michael, I think we got to stop this because we're under bombardment. He says, yes, I can hear him. He said, what are you going to do? I said, well, I'm going downstairs and, we'll live it through and then look forward to see you next time.
Dallaire keeps morale up any way he can.
I went upstairs and got a tape from Stomping Tom Connors. And I brought that down and I put this thing right in the middle of all of us. And turned on Stomping Tom. And one was the Blue Beret and a Canadian and all good, vibrant singing. And the bombs were falling. The blasts were falling, the windows were shaking, the building was shaking. And we were all in there singing and stomping to beat the band.
Dallaire's strategy with the press begins to pay off. The Security Council condemns the massacres, but the United States will not permit the use of the word genocide. Under international law, the word triggers an obligation to intervene.
We have every reason to believe that acts of genocide have occurred.
How many acts of genocide does it take to make genocide?
Alan, that's just not a question that I'm in a position to answer.
True that that you have specific guidance not to use the word genocide in isolation, but always to preface it with this word acts of.
I have guidance which I try to use as best as I can. I'm not. I have. There are formulations that we are using that we are trying to be consistent in our use of.
May 17th, 1994. The embarrassment becomes too much. After a heated debate, the U.S. gives in. The Security Council authorizes a new mission, UNAMIR 2. But Dallaire knows just how slowly the UN moves, and in the meantime he can do nothing, except head out every day with his Ghanaian escort to document the genocide that he cannot stop.
I went into a village. We got there about we estimate 3-4 hours after the killing. There's no noise. The birds are singing. Then you have this incredible silence. They were all dead. In one hut, they had ripped open the stomach of a pregnant woman and pulled out the fetus. They chopped it in half. In another hut, they had taken the arm of about a 2-year-old, and they had chopped it up like you chop up salami. And it was still there, laid out. The hand, all these pieces, and the child. They would suffocate them by piling them. They'd throw them into latrines, alive but injured. And they were still alive. And there were a couple. And we'd take stock and then keep pushing to the next village.
Dallaire works his men relentlessly so they are too tired to dwell on what they've seen. He keeps a watchful eye. Whenever one begins to crack, he sends him home. But he is the only one left who has been there from the start, and now it is taking its toll.
I was not sleeping at all, eating. And I had developed this habit of taking off without my escort, alone, for a couple hours. Essentially looking for ambushes and trying to get killed.
July 4th, 1994. The RPF take Kigali. They stop the genocide. Colonel Bagasora and hundreds of thousands of Hutus flee across the border. 3 days later, UNAMIR 2 lands in Kigali. It is a Chapter 7 peacemaking mission. It has the authority that Dallaire was begging for, the power to intervene. Dallaire watches the fresh troops arrive.
I had become so sick of death, of watching dogs eating bodies and the rotting bodies and the smell and everything seemed dead. That I sent my Ghanaians off to go buy a couple of goats, a family, and that we'd put it in the compound and we'd put a bit of life. But I really got fond of those, and because you could see the young ones and Mother and Billy, and it was a normalcy, alive. I was in my office one afternoon, and the young chap in the office next came in running in and said, "General," he said, there are dogs after your goats." I didn't even hesitate. I looked outside, saw that, grabbed my pistol, ran towards that compound and started shooting. And I blasted away at those dogs for some time. Then when I finished, I turned around and there were a lot of people watching me.
He knows the last soldier he has to send home is himself.
I asked to be relieved of my command.
Dallaire leaves to an honor guard of black soldiers in blue berets singing Auld Lang Syne.
In the tradition, the Ghanaian tradition, the commander leaves in a vehicle. So they made me stand up there. And all my staff, all the ones who had survived all this, the survivors, with 2 ropes, pulled me out of the compound. And then I flew out.
By September 3rd, 1994, he is sitting behind his desk in Ottawa.
Waiting for the food to reach this remote region and waiting for the world to reach out.
Fearing retribution from the RPF, 2 million Hutus, the killers among them, stream into refugee camps in Zaire. Ironically, it is these images of fleeing Hutus that brings genocide to the attention of the world. The enormity of the genocide now dawns. No less than 800,000 people have been murdered in 100 days, a faster rate of killing than the Nazis achieved in the Holocaust. The hunt for a scapegoat soon arrives at Romeo Dallaire's door. The Belgian government has gotten hold of Dallaire's January 11th facts. They want to know why, if he knew what was coming, he had not done more to prevent the deaths of the Belgian soldiers.
Belgium pushed for a mission to Rwanda, and when that mission went sour, they ran and hid. And they had to cover that up. And the way that they did it was it was very convenient to have a foreign scapegoat.
But Dallaire is Canadian and out of reach. The Belgian military court-martials Luc Marchal instead, blaming him for the death of its soldiers. Dallaire testifies in his defense, and Marchal is acquitted. But there is no one to absolve Dallaire. He is depressed, his left arm paralyzed from the trauma. He tries to take his own life, twice. Then the UN's January fax surfaces, leaked to the New Yorker magazine. It is the fax forbidding Dallaire from raiding the arms caches. The blame now shifts to the UN.
No.
The organization backpedals.
One of the things that we've asked them to do is we did not give that information the importance and the correct interpretation that it deserved. We realized that only in hindsight. I'm not denying that.
It was a mistake.
Oh, certainly.
Was it a mistake that cost lives, do you believe?
Eventually, yes. 3 months later.
But Dallaire does not blame the UN organization. He holds its member nations responsible, especially those like the US, who used their veto to stop intervention. He argues that nothing will change as long as the UN has to beg for troops each time there's a crisis. Instead, a permanent force is needed, a sort of fire brigade for human conflict. It would serve human rights instead of national interest.
And where a nation, if it uses troops, must expect troops to be faced with danger and die in the accomplishment of their duty. But nobody likes casualties in peace support operations or conflict resolution. The nation's not at risk. Why are our boys and girls dying over there? You know, why? Why? Because we're into an era where we're fighting and helping for a philosophy of life, for an ideology, that man is man is man. We're all the same.
In May of 2001, the first attempt at a rapid reaction force was deployed on the border of Eritrea and Ethiopia. But the U.S. has refused to participate, and the force's future is uncertain. Today, in Gikongoro, Elias Raworinda looks after the memorial.
oya ntabwo ari byo nahisemo urumva ntabwo nishimiye kujya gukora aho abantu bapfuye gusa nakwishyura ko abantu bapfuye ngo nze kuza gukora n'akazi nkora hano ntabwo ari akazi k'amafaranga k'igihembo.
Okay, anyway, what kind of work which is doing here is not paid.
Elias says that only somebody without blood on their hands should work at Gikongoro.
ngeze ni Kigali Dareri yamenye ko nageze hano noneho arampamagaza njya mu biro bye yambwiye ko ababajwe nuko umuryango wanjye wapfuye cyane cyane kwa musaza wanjye ko atashoboye kugira icyo abikoraho noneho ambaza ikintu ashobora kumfashaho aho rero narebye mbona hano kuri hoteli Sherando harasenyutse cyane noneho igitekerezo kinzamo gutyo ntabwo nabitekerejeho cyane ndamubwiye nti ndashaka gusana kuri iriya hoteli.
Dallaire helped Anne-Marie find the money to rebuild her hotel, which now thrives again.
I would like to meet again, to meet him again, and I will wish him welcome here in our country. Ariko ngiye nifuza ko ukuri kujya hagaragara hanyuma tukaziga no kubabarira.
800,000 plus were slaughtered. I can't punch a pilot that and say, you did your best and you couldn't do anything more.
Most people think that there was nothing else that you could have done.
It gives me no solace. None. In fact, it reinforces my guilt of failure. I was not able to bring that international community, that world body based on humanity and the respect of humanity, I could not make them shift to be so conscious and so aware, so guilty to actually want to deploy and stop. I'm the one. It was me.
One result of the Rwandan genocide has been an international criminal tribunal in Arusha, Tanzania, to try those indicted of crimes against humanity. One of the accused is Colonel Theoneste Bagasora. Later this year, Dallaire is going to Africa to testify against Bagasora.
Will you go back to Rwanda?
No. I can't go back until the tribunal's finished.
Do you want to?
Oh. I'd go back right now. It's the only real place I want to live. Enough.
let me let